The exploration vessel Horizon's Edge drifted through the darkness of space like a small fish in an endless ocean. Amy Carter sat at her station in the communications bay, her fingers moving across the holographic controls as she monitored the deep space frequencies. The ship had been surveying this uncharted sector for 3 weeks now, and the crew had fallen into a comfortable routine. Nothing exciting ever happened this far from civilized space, or so they thought. Amy was 26 years old, with brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail, and gray eyes that reflected the blue glow of her screens. She had joined the exploration service right out of college, eager to see the galaxy and make first contact with new civilizations. So far, the job had been mostly scanning empty space and drinking bad coffee. She was about to take another sip from her mug when every alarm on the ship started screaming at once. The bridge erupted into chaos. Captain Danny Morris, a weathered man in his 50s with more gray in his beard than brown, was shouting orders to his crew. The sensors had detected something massive dropping out of hyperspace directly ahead of them. Amy pulled up the visual feed on her main screen and felt her blood turn cold. The ship that appeared before them looked like a cathedral carved from black glass, all sharp angles and impossible geometry. It was easily 10 times the size of the Horizon's Edge, and it radiated a kind of wrongness that made her stomach twist. Before anyone could react, the alien ship fired some kind of pulse weapon. The Horizon's Edge shuddered violently, and every system went dark for 3 seconds. When the lights came back on, half the consoles were dead and the engine room was reporting total power failure. They were dead in space, helpless before this unknown threat. Captain Morris ordered an immediate evacuation to the escape pods, but it was already too late. The alien ship extended boarding tubes that attached to the hull with metallic clangs that echoed through the corridors. Amy ran toward the escape pod bay along with her crewmates. Engineer Kyle Bennett, a tall man with red hair and freckles, was right behind her. Medical Officer Lisa Hayes, a small woman with dark skin and kind eyes, was helping injured crew members toward safety. But the aliens were faster than any of them expected. The corridor filled with a strange mist, and figures emerged from it that made Amy want to scream. The aliens stood over 7 feet tall, with bodies that seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow given form. They wore armor that looked organic, as if it had grown rather than been manufactured. Their faces, if they could be called faces, had too many eyes and mouths that opened in ways that violated every law of biology Amy knew. These were the Vexnari, though Amy would not learn their name until later. All she knew in that moment was pure animal terror. The aliens moved through the crew with terrible efficiency. Their weapons did not kill but paralyzed, sending out tendrils of energy that wrapped around humans and pulled them to the floor. Amy tried to run but felt something cold grip her ankle. She fell hard, her chin hitting the metal floor and filling her mouth with the taste of blood. Strong hands, too many hands, lifted her up and carried her toward the boarding tube. The interior of the alien ship was worse than the exterior. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with a faint bioluminescence that cast everything in sickly green light. Amy was dragged through corridors that twisted in directions that hurt to look at, past chambers where she glimpsed things she desperately wished she had not seen. Other aliens, other species she did not recognize, suspended in fields of crackling energy, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. She was brought to a large chamber that looked like a twisted version of an operating theater. The walls were lined with equipment that served purposes she could not begin to guess at. In the center of the room was a raised platform surrounded by a shimmering containment field. The aliens threw her onto the platform and she felt the field activate around her, a pressure that pushed against her skin from all directions. Kyle and Lisa were brought in and placed in smaller containment cells along the wall. Amy could see them but could not reach them. Kyle was shouting something, his voice muffled by the energy fields, his face red with anger and fear. Lisa looked pale, her medical training probably allowing her to guess at what was about to happen better than the rest of them. One of the aliens approached Amy's platform. This one was different from the others, wearing robes that seemed to be made of living tissue that writhed and twisted. It spoke, and somehow the sounds it made translated into words Amy could understand, though the voice was wrong, layered with harmonics that made her teeth ache. The creature called itself Zixthron, and it explained in clinical detail what was about to happen. The Vexnari were harvesters of suffering. They believed that pain and fear contained a unique form of energy that they could extract and use to power their technology and fuel their rituals. They had perfected the art of torture over 10,000 years, learning exactly how to inflict maximum agony while keeping their subjects alive and conscious for as long as possible. Amy was going to be their latest experiment, their newest source of harvested pain. Zixthran activated the first device and Amy's world exploded into fire. It was not real fire, she knew that on some level, but her nervous system could not tell the difference. Every nerve in her body screamed at once, telling her brain that she was burning alive, that her skin was peeling away, that her bones were cracking from the heat. She tried to scream but found she had no air in her lungs. The pain went on, seconds stretching into eternities. When it finally stopped, Amy gasped for breath, her body shaking uncontrollably. She looked down at herself expecting to see charred flesh but found her skin intact. The pain had been an illusion, a trick of the Vexenari technology that attacked the nervous system directly. Zixthran watched her with those too many eyes, recording her reactions with instruments she could not name. The second device was worse. This one did not attack her body but her mind, forcing her to relive her worst memories amplified 1,000 times. She watched her father die again, not peacefully in a hospital bed as he actually had, but in horrible ways that her tortured mind invented. She felt every loss, every failure, every moment of shame and regret compressed into a single endless instant of psychological torment. The third device combined both approaches. Her body felt like it was being torn apart at the molecular level, while her mind was assaulted with images of everyone she loved suffering because of her. She saw Kyle and Lisa being tortured, heard them begging her to make it stop, knowing it was not real but unable to convince her breaking mind of that fact. Time lost all meaning in that chamber of horrors. Amy could not tell if minutes or hours had passed. She was only dimly aware of Kyle and Lisa in their cells, forced to watch, their faces twisted with helpless rage and grief. The Vexenari took their emotional suffering too, feeding on the despair that radiated from the humans who could only watch their friend be destroyed. Zixthran cycled through different devices, different methods, always careful to keep Amy conscious, always monitoring her vital signs to ensure she stayed on the edge but did not cross over into death. The alien was a master of its craft, knowing exactly how much the human body could endure before breaking completely. But there was a limit to what any biological organism could withstand. At the 37-minute mark, Amy's heart began to fail. Her body, pushed beyond every natural limit, finally gave up. The pain was so overwhelming that death came almost as a relief, a darkness that rushed up to claim her, a silence after the screaming. Amy Carter's heart stopped beating. Her brain activity flatlined. Every monitor the Vexenari had attached to her registered the same thing: complete biological shutdown. She was dead by every measurable standard that existed in the galaxy. Zixthran was satisfied with the harvest. 37 minutes of pure, refined suffering extracted and stored in the alien technology. It was a good result, better than many species provided. The alien began the process of deactivating the containment field, preparing to dispose of the body and select the next subject from the remaining humans. Kyle was screaming, his voice hoarse, beating his fists against the containment field that held him. Lisa had her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. They had watched their friend die slowly and horribly and known they would be next. The Vexenari technicians moved to remove Amy's body from the platform. But before they could deactivate the field completely, something impossible happened. The monitors that had shown complete biological death suddenly flickered. Amy's heart, which had been still for exactly 37 minutes, began to beat again. Her chest rose as her lungs drew breath. Her brain activity spiked back to normal levels. Her eyes, which had been staring sightlessly at the ceiling, focused and blinked. Amy Carter sat up slowly, her movements smooth and controlled, showing no sign of the trauma her body had just endured. The chamber fell silent. Every Vexenari present stopped what they were doing and stared at the human on the platform. In 10,000 years of harvesting suffering from countless species across hundreds of worlds, they had never seen anything like this. Resurrection was not unknown in the galaxy, but it required technology, external intervention, or specific biological capabilities that they had tested effie. Amy Carter stood in the center of the Vexenari torture chamber, and the aliens around her did not know what to do. Their instruments showed readings that contradicted everything they understood about biology and death. The human female had been completely dead for 37 minutes, and now she was alive again without any external intervention. Sixth Ren moved closer to examine her, its multiple eyes studying her with a mixture of scientific curiosity and something that might have been concern. The alien harvester demanded to know what Amy was, speaking in that layered voice that made the air vibrate. Amy looked at the creature calmly, with none of the terror that had filled her eyes before she died. She told Zixthran that she was human, nothing more and nothing less, but that the Vexnari had discovered something about her species that even humans had not known. She explained that torturing a human to death was not an ending, but rather a beginning of something the aliens could not comprehend. The Vexnari increased the power to the containment fields holding Kyle and Lisa, fearing that they might possess the same ability. Kyle was pressed against the transparent wall of his cell, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at Amy. He shouted to her, asking how this was possible, asking if she was really alive or if this was some kind of trick. Amy turned to look at her friend and told him that she had truly died, that she remembered the moment her heart stopped. But then there had been darkness and suddenly she was back. Lisa, with her medical training, was analyzing what she was seeing with a more clinical eye. She called out questions about what Amy was feeling, whether she had pain, whether her memories were intact. Amy answered each question thoughtfully, explaining that she felt no pain at all, that every injury from the torture had healed completely, and that her memories were not only intact, but somehow clearer and more detailed than before. Zixthran accessed the collective knowledge database of the Vexnari species, searching through records that spanned 10,000 years of galactic conquest and pain harvesting. The alien was looking for any other species that had shown this capability, any precedent that would explain what had just happened. The search came back empty. There were species with regeneration abilities, species with advanced healing, even species that could repair fatal damage given enough time. But there was no record of any species that could simply return from complete biological death without technology or outside help. Amy walked toward the cells holding her crewmates, and the Vexnari did not try to stop her. They were too confused, too uncertain about what she had become. She placed her hand on the containment field holding Kyle, and something strange happened. The energy barrier flickered and weakened under her touch, as if her body was somehow interfering with its operation. Kyle felt the pressure on him lessen, and he pressed forward against the field, hope beginning to replace the despair on his face. The Vexnari technicians tried to compensate, routing more power to the containment systems, but Amy kept her hand in place and the field continued to weaken. She told Kyle and Lisa to be ready, that she was going to get them out of there. Her voice carried absolute certainty, as if failure was not even a possibility she considered. The transformation in her was remarkable. From a terrified young woman being tortured to death to someone who radiated calm confidence in the face of her tormentors. Zixthran ordered the other Vexnari to restrain Amy, to recapture her and place her in a stronger containment field. Several of the aliens moved forward, their weapons raised, devices designed to cause paralysis and pain. They fired at Amy and the energy weapon struck her directly. Her body seized up and she fell to the floor, every muscle locked in spasm. Kyle screamed in rage and Lisa looked away, unable to watch another friend suffer. But Amy did not stay down for long. The paralysis that should have lasted for hours wore off in seconds. She stood up, brushing herself off as if the weapons had been nothing more than an annoyance. The Vexnari fired again, this time with lethal force. Weapons that would stop a heart and shut down a nervous system. Amy fell again, her body going limp as death claimed her for the second time since her capture. The aliens waited, watching the corpse on the floor, wondering if the resurrection had been a one-time event. 37 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Kyle and Lisa counted every second, praying that whatever had brought Amy back once would work again. The Vexnari monitored the body with their instruments, documenting everything for their records. At exactly the 37-minute mark, Amy's eyes opened. She took a breath and sat up, looking around the chamber as if she had just woken from a brief nap. The Vexnari recoiled, their confidence in their understanding of the universe shaken. Amy stood and walked back to the containment cells, picking up where she had left off as if the interruption had never happened. This time, when she touched the field holding Kyle, she understood it better. She could feel the energy patterns, could sense how the technology worked. Her hand moved in a specific pattern, and the containment field collapsed completely. Kyle stumbled out of the cell, free for the first time since their capture. He grabbed Amy in a hug, barely able to believe she was real and alive. She hugged him back, then moved to Lisa's cell and repeated the process, collapsing the field with a touch that seemed almost casual. The three humans stood together in the torture chamber, surrounded by confused and increasingly frightened aliens. Amy told her friends that they needed to leave quickly, before the Vexnari figured out how to contain her properly. She led them toward the exit, moving with a confidence that suggested she knew exactly where she was going. Kyle asked her how she knew the way out, and Amy paused before answering that she just knew, that dying and coming back had somehow given her knowledge she should not possess. They ran through the corridors of the alien ship, Amy in the lead with Kyle and Lisa struggling to keep up. The Vexnari tried to stop them at various points using weapons and force fields, but nothing seemed to work on Amy anymore. She died twice more during the escape, once from a weapon that literally disintegrated her body, and once from exposure to a toxic gas that filled a corridor they needed to pass through. Each time, 37 minutes later, she returned whole and unharmed in the spot where she had fallen. Kyle and Lisa had to hide and wait during those 37-minute intervals, watching over Amy's body while Vexnari search parties passed by. It was terrifying and surreal, sitting next to a corpse and knowing that it would soon be their friend again. But each time Amy returned, she seemed to know more, to understand more about the ship and its systems. She started speaking phrases in the Vexnari language, directing Kyle and Lisa through maintenance passages that should have been impossible for her to know about. They reached a hangar bay where smaller ships were docked. Amy approached one of the Vexnari shuttles, a sleek craft that looked like a smaller version of the main ship's disturbing architecture. She placed her hands on the control panel, and the shuttle's systems activated, responding to her touch as if she were one of its creators. Kyle stared at her, asking how she could possibly know how to operate alien technology she had never seen before. Amy's answer was simple, but deeply unsettling. She told them that every time she died and came back, she brought something with her, knowledge and understanding that had not been there before. She could read the Vexnari written language now, could understand their technology, could even grasp the basics of their psychology and culture. Death was changing her, improving her, making her into something more than she had been. The shuttle's door opened, and the three humans climbed aboard. Amy sat in the pilot's seat, and her hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, as if she had been flying Vexnari ships her entire life. The shuttle lifted off the deck and shot out of the hangar bay, leaving the massive alien vessel behind. The Vexnari tried to pursue them, but Amy flew the shuttle with skill that should have taken years to develop, dodging weapons fire and outmaneuvering the larger ships. Once they were clear and had jumped into hyperspace, heading back toward human territory, the three of them sat in the shuttle's small cabin and tried to process what had happened. Lisa pulled out a medical scanner from an emergency kit on the shuttle and ran it over Amy. The readings showed that Amy's DNA had changed, that there were gene sequences active now that had been dormant before. Her cellular structure was different, more stable, more resistant to damage. Kyle asked the question that all of them were thinking. He wanted to know if this resurrection ability was unique to Amy, or if all humans could do it. Amy considered this carefully before answering that she did not think she was special, that the genetic changes Lisa was seeing were in sequences that all humans possessed. The Vexnari had simply triggered something that evolution had built into humanity millions of years ago, a last-ditch survival mechanism that activated only under the most extreme circumstances. Lisa pointed out that the trigger seemed to be very specific. Amy had not resurrected when she died from the disintegration weapon or the toxic gas until after the first torture-induced death. It was as if dying from deliberate, sustained torture had activated the ability, and once activated, it worked for any cause of death. Amy agreed, noting that her first death had been from two. The human patrol ships escorted the stolen Vexnari shuttle to the nearest military station, a large orbital platform called Gateway 7 that served as a hub for colonial defense operations. Amy, Kyle, and Lisa were taken immediately to medical facilities where doctors and scientists swarmed around them, running tests and asking endless questions. The story of Amy's death and resurrection spread through the station within hours, and soon every human in the sector had heard about the girl who came back from torture. Admiral Greg Patterson arrived at Gateway 7 2 days after the survivors were recovered. He was a tall man with iron-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that had seen too many battles. Patterson had commanded the Earth Defense Force for 15 years and had dealt with countless alien threats, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he was about to hear. He sat across from Amy in a secure briefing room, with Kyle and Lisa present as witnesses, and listened to her account of what had happened aboard the Vexnari ship. Amy spoke clearly and calmly, describing every detail of her capture, torture, death, and resurrection. She explained how the pain had been beyond anything she thought possible, how she had felt her heart stop, and how exactly 37 minutes later she had simply opened her eyes and been alive again. Patterson listened without interrupting, his face showing no emotion, but his hands gripped the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles turned white. When Amy finished her account, Patterson was silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question that mattered most to military planning. He wanted to know if she thought all humans could do what she had done, if this resurrection ability was something universal to their species. Amy told him that the medical tests seemed to indicate that every human carried the same dormant genetic sequences she had, that there was nothing special about her DNA before the torture activated the ability. Lisa presented her medical findings, showing the genetic changes that had occurred in Amy's cells. She explained that the dormant sequences appeared to be an evolutionary fail-safe mechanism, something built into human biology millions of years ago, but never needed until now. The trigger was very specific: death caused by deliberate and sustained torture designed to break the victim psychologically as well as physically. Quick deaths or accidental deaths would not activate the ability, but torture death would flip the genetic switch. Kyle added his observations about Amy's enhanced capabilities after resurrection. He described how she had been able to operate Vexnari technology without training, how she had developed faster reflexes and greater mental clarity, how each subsequent death and resurrection seemed to grant her more knowledge and abilities. Patterson asked if these enhancements were permanent, and Amy confirmed that they seemed to be, that she still possessed all the abilities even weeks after leaving the alien ship. The Admiral leaned back in his chair and considered the implications. If Amy's case was typical, then humanity had stumbled upon a defensive capability that would fundamentally change their relationship with the galaxy. Species that relied on terror and torture as weapons of conquest would find those weapons useless against humans. But Patterson also recognized the danger of this knowledge becoming public. There were governments and organizations that might see humans as valuable test subjects, wanting to trigger and study the resurrection ability for their own purposes. Patterson made his decision quickly. He told Amy that her story needed to be shared with all of humanity and with the wider galaxy, but that it needed to be done carefully and strategically. Earth needed to control the narrative to make it clear that torturing humans would have consequences. He asked Amy if she would be willing to serve as humanity's representative in this matter, to be the face and voice of this new reality. Amy agreed without hesitation. She understood that her life had changed forever the moment the Vexnari captured her, that she could never go back to being a simple communications officer on an exploration ship. If her suffering could protect other humans from experiencing what she had experienced, then it was worth whatever came next. The United Earth Council convened an emergency session within a week. Representatives from all human colonies and territories gathered in the council chambers on Earth, a massive dome structure overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Amy stood before them and told her story again, this time with full medical documentation and video evidence from the Vexnari shuttle systems that Kyle had managed to download. The council members listened in stunned silence as Amy described her torture, death, and impossible return to life. After Amy's presentation, the council erupted into heated debate. Some representatives wanted to keep the information classified, fearing that revealing it would make humans targets for experimentation. Others argued that the galaxy needed to know immediately, that every day they waited put more humans at risk from species that used torture as a tool. The debate raged for hours with no clear consensus emerging. It was Amy who ended the debate. She stood and spoke without being recognized, her voice cutting through the arguing representatives. She told them that keeping this secret was impossible and immoral. Impossible because the Vexnari already knew, and word would spread from them regardless of what Earth decided. Immoral because there were humans out there right now, on frontier colonies and exploration ships, who might be captured and tortured by species that did not know the consequences of their actions. The Council voted, and the decision was made. Earth would send a message to every known species in the galaxy, a clear and direct warning about what happened when you tortured a human. The message would include Amy's testimony, medical evidence, and a simple but powerful statement. Humanity remembered, humanity survived, and humanity would hold accountable any species that chose to torture their people. The message went out through every communication channel Earth possessed. It was broadcast on open frequencies, sent through diplomatic networks, transmitted to every space station and colony that could receive it. The message was translated into hundreds of alien languages, ensuring that no species could claim ignorance. Within days, every major civilization in the galaxy had received and reviewed the evidence. The reactions varied wildly. Some species expressed horror at what the Vexnari had done and offered sympathy to humanity. Others were skeptical, believing the evidence had been fabricated as some kind of propaganda ploy. A few species, particularly those that had been victims of the Vexnari themselves, reached out to Earth with messages of solidarity and understanding. The Vexnari response was silence. Their ships retreated to their home systems and they ceased all contact with other species. Intelligence reports suggested that the Vexnari civilization was in chaos, their entire culture built on harvesting suffering, suddenly faced with a species that could not be harvested. Client species that the Vexnari had kept under control through fear and pain began to rebel, emboldened by the example of human resilience. But not every species believed the warning. 3 months after Earth's message went out, a merchant vessel called the Prairie Star was captured by a slave-trading cartel known as the Kreshnai. These aliens were brutish creatures that made their fortune capturing and selling sentient beings to the highest bidder. They had heard the stories about human resurrection but dismissed them as propaganda and lies. The Kreshnai selected a human from the Prairie Star's crew for interrogation, wanting to know Earth shipping routes and colony locations. His name was Chris Morton, a cargo specialist who was 23 years old and had never expected to be anything more than a civilian working an honest job. The Kreshnai tortured him with crude but effective methods, beating and burning him while demanding information he did not have. Chris Morton endured 45 minutes of agony before his heart gave out. The Kreshnai were not as skilled as the Vexnari, but they were thorough enough. Chris died in a cold cell far from home, his last thoughts of his family back on Earth. The Kreshnai dumped his body in a corner and moved on to select their next victim. 37 minutes after his death, Chris Morton opened his eyes. The Kreshnai guards who had been walking past his cell stopped and stared in shock. The human they had just killed was sitting up, looking at his hands with an expression of wonder and confusion. Chris stood slowly, testing his body, finding that all the injuries from his torture had vanished completely. The news of Chris Morton's resurrection reached Earth within days. Amy immediately requested permission to speak with him, and a video call was arranged between them. Chris looked tired but calm as he appeared on the screen, his face showing the same detachment that Amy recognized from her own reflection. They talked for an hour, sharing their experiences, comparing notes on what it felt like to die and return. Chris told Amy that the resurrection had been disorienting, that one moment he was dying in pain, and the next he was simply alive again with no memory of the time in between. He described how he could now understand the Kreshnai language, how he knew things about their technology and culture that he had never learned. Amy confirmed that this matched her own experience, that dying and coming back seemed to grant knowledge about the species that killed you. Within weeks, there were more cases. A human explorer named Claire Hudson was captured by P. 6 months after Amy Carter's resurrection, humanity had documented 23 cases of humans who had died from torture and returned to life. Each case followed the same pattern, and each resurrected human exhibited the same enhanced abilities and psychological changes. The galaxy was slowly accepting the reality that humans could not be broken by torture. But some species remained skeptical or hostile to this new development. Amy received an invitation to speak at the Galactic Council, an ancient organization that had governed interstellar relations for thousands of years. The council chambers were carved from a hollowed asteroid that drifted in neutral space, a place where no single species held power. Representatives from hundreds of civilizations gathered there to discuss matters of universal importance, and Amy's testimony about human resurrection had been deemed significant enough to warrant a full council session. She arrived with Admiral Patterson and a small delegation from Earth. The journey to the council chambers took 2 weeks, giving Amy time to prepare her statement and consider what she wanted to say. Kyle and Lisa accompanied her as well, serving as witnesses and support. Lisa had continued monitoring Amy's condition, and the medical officer's concern about the psychological changes in resurrected humans had only grown stronger. The council chambers were impressive in their scale and age. The walls were covered in carvings that depicted the history of galactic civilization, showing the rise and fall of empires that had existed before humanity even learned to make fire. Representatives from alien species sat in circular tiers that surrounded a central speaking platform. Some were humanoid. Others were so alien that Amy struggled to identify which parts of their bodies were heads and which were limbs. Amy stood on the central platform and looked up at the assembled representatives. She felt no nervousness, no anxiety about speaking before such a powerful gathering. This absence of fear was one of the changes that resurrection had brought. And while it made her effective as a speaker, it also reminded her that she was no longer quite the person she had been before the Vexnari captured her. The council speaker, an ancient being from a species called the Talnex that looked like a collection of crystalline structures held together by magnetic fields, asked Amy to present her testimony. She began by stating her name and position as Earth's representative on matters of human resurrection. Then she launched into a clear and detailed explanation of what happened when humans were tortured to death. Amy described the biological mechanism as far as scientists understood it, explaining that the resurrection ability was triggered by a specific combination of circumstances. The death had to come from deliberate torture, from sustained infliction of suffering meant to break both body and mind. Natural death, accidental death, or even death in combat would not trigger the ability. But torture death activated something deep in human genetics that brought the victim back exactly 37 minutes later. A representative from a species called the Zhurn interrupted her presentation. The Zhurn were known for using pain compliance in their justice system, and they seemed concerned about the implications of human resurrection for their legal practices. The representative asked if Amy was claiming that any use of pain against humans would trigger this ability. Amy clarified that the trigger was specifically torture leading to death, not simply pain or punishment. A Zhurn criminal could still be held accountable under Zhurn law as long as the punishment did not cross the line into sustained torture that caused death. Another representative, this one from a species called the Drexkar, that valued military strength above all else, asked if human resurrection meant that humans were now immune to all forms of death. Amy explained that resurrected humans could still die from other causes, but that once the resurrection ability had been activated by torture death, it seemed to work for any subsequent cause of death. She had personally died 5 times now from various causes, and each time she had returned after 37 minutes. The council chamber erupted in whispered conversations as representatives processed this information. The implications were staggering. A human who had been tortured to death once would become functionally immortal, at least on the time scale of individual combat or conflict. Such humans could not be permanently killed by conventional means, making them extremely dangerous opponents. Admiral Patterson stood to address the council, his military bearing evident in every movement. He stated clearly that Earth had no desire for conflict with other species, that humanity sought peaceful coexistence with all sentient life. But he also made it clear that humanity would defend its people and would hold accountable any species that chose to torture humans. He listed the tools Earth would use, starting with economic sanctions, trade restrictions, and diplomatic isolation. War would be a last resort, but it remained an option if necessary. A representative from a wealthy trading consortium asked what Earth wanted from the council. Patterson's answer was simple. He wanted formal recognition of human resurrection as a protected status, with clear guidelines preventing experimentation on humans, and harsh penalties for any species that tortured humans. He wanted the council to make it official policy that humanity was not to be used as test subjects for studying resurrection, that doing so would result in immediate sanctions and potential military intervention. The council debated for hours, with some species supporting Earth's position, and others arguing that it was dangerous to give humans special protected status. A few representatives pointed out that recognizing human resurrection might encourage humans to become aggressive, knowing they could not be permanently killed if they had been tortured once. Patterson countered by noting that resurrected humans had shown no signs of increased aggression, and that Earth had no interest in starting conflicts. The session ended without a formal vote, but the Council agreed to draft guidelines regarding human treatment. Amy knew this was the best outcome they could hope for. The Council moved slowly by design, and getting them to even acknowledge the issue was a significant victory. She returned to Earth with Patterson and the others, feeling satisfied with what they had accomplished. But the trip back to Earth was interrupted by an urgent message. A colony ship carrying 500 humans, including many families with children, had been seized by a scientific research group called the Quelnari. These aliens were known throughout the galaxy as brilliant scientists and scholars, obsessed with understanding the universe through empirical observation. They had taken the colony ship and were conducting experiments on the human passengers, testing the limits of human resurrection for themselves. The news hit Amy like a physical blow. She had been so focused on dealing with species that used torture as a weapon that she had not considered the threat from species that saw humans as interesting research subjects. The Quelnari were not cruel or malicious. They simply did not understand that some knowledge was not worth the cost of obtaining it. They were killing humans to document the resurrection process, treating people as experimental subjects rather than sentient beings deserving of rights and dignity. Admiral Patterson immediately ordered the fleet to mobilize. 23 warships, including the massive dreadnought Washington Shield, were assembled and sent to the coordinates where the Quelnari research station was located. Patterson commanded the fleet personally, and he insisted that Amy accompany them. Her presence would send a clear message about how seriously Earth took this violation. The journey to the Quelnari station took 3 days at maximum speed. During that time, intelligence reports confirmed that the Quelnari had already killed 7 humans in their experiments, documenting each resurrection and running tests on the resurrected individuals. The reports included names and ages, and Amy felt something cold settle in her chest when she saw that 3 of the victims were children under the age of 12. Lisa tried to talk to Amy about what she was feeling, worried about her friend's emotional state. But Amy's response was calm and measured, almost eerily so. She said she understood that the Quelnari thought they were doing important scientific work, that they probably justified their actions by noting that the humans came back to life. But she also said that this justification was not acceptable, that causing death and suffering in the name of knowledge was still wrong regardless of the resurrection. Kyle asked Amy what she planned to do when they reached the station. She told him that she would go in personally to retrieve the humans, that her resurrection ability made her the ideal person for the mission. If the Quelnari tried to stop her with lethal force, she would simply come back and continue. Kyle protested that this would mean Amy would have to die repeatedly, but she dismissed his concern with a shrug. Death no longer held meaning for her the way it did for normal humans. The fleet arrived at the Quelnari research station, a massive structure that orbited a gas giant. The station was filled with laboratories and research facilities, housing hundreds of Quelnari scientists and their equipment. Scans showed the human colonists scattered throughout the station, many showing signs of stress and trauma. Several humans registered as recently deceased, waiting for their 37-minute resurrection period to complete. Patterson opened communique. The stealth shuttle drifted toward the Quelnari research station like a shadow moving through darkness. Amy sat in the pilot's seat with her hands steady on the controls, her enhanced abilities allowing her to navigate through the station's sensor net without triggering any alarms. Kyle and Lisa sat behind her, checking their equipment and preparing for whatever they would find inside. The hour that Admiral Patterson had given the Quelnari had passed without any response, which meant they were going in whether the aliens cooperated or not. Amy brought the shuttle alongside a maintenance airlock on the outer ring of the station. She placed her hand on the shuttle's control panel and somehow interfaced with the station's systems, a trick she had learned through her multiple deaths and resurrections. The airlock opened without any security alerts, and the 3 humans moved quickly into the station's corridors. The interior was sterile and bright, with white walls that curved in ways that suggested the Quelnari did not think about architecture the same way humans did. They moved through the maintenance passages, following a route that Amy seemed to know instinctively. Kyle asked her how she could possibly know the layout of a station she had never visited, and Amy explained that dying and coming back had given her an understanding of how different species thought and built their structures. The Quelnari were logical and efficient, which meant their station would be organized in predictable patterns that she could deduce. The first Quelnari security team they encountered appeared around a corner without warning. The aliens were tall and thin, with smooth gray skin and large black eyes that suggested they had evolved in low-light conditions. They carried weapons that looked like crystalline rods, and they raised these weapons as soon as they saw the humans. Amy stepped forward calmly, placing herself between the aliens and her friends. The Quelnari fired their weapons, beams of blue energy that struck Amy directly in the chest. Her body seized and she fell, her heart stopping as the energy overloaded her nervous system. Kyle shouted and started to move toward the aliens, but Lisa grabbed him and pulled him into a side corridor. They waited in the shadows, counting the minutes while the Quelnari examined Amy's body with scientific instruments, documenting her death with detached curiosity. 37 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Kyle and Lisa watched from their hiding spot as Amy's body lay motionless on the floor. The Quelnari had moved on after confirming her death, apparently satisfied that the security threat had been neutralized. But when the 37th minute ended, Amy's eyes opened and she sat up smoothly. She stood and brushed herself off, then looked around until she spotted Kyle and Lisa's hiding place and gestured for them to follow. They continued deeper into the station, and now Amy moved with even more purpose than before. She told Kyle and Lisa that dying had given her knowledge of the station's security systems and the Quelnari language. She could read the signs on the walls now, could understand the announcements that echoed through the corridors. She knew exactly where the human colonists were being held. The holding area was in the central research wing, a massive chamber filled with transparent containment cells. Amy stopped at the entrance and looked inside, her face showing no emotion even as she saw what the Quelnari had done. Human beings were strapped to examination tables, hooked up to monitoring equipment that recorded their vital signs. Children sat in corners of their cells with empty eyes, their minds struggling to process the trauma of being killed and brought back repeatedly. Lisa moved immediately into medical mode, entering the chamber and checking on the colonists. Many of them were physically unharmed thanks to the resurrection process, but the psychological damage was evident. They flinched when Lisa approached, their bodies remembering pain even if the injuries had healed. Kyle began working on the containment field controls, trying to shut them down and free the prisoners. Amy walked deeper into the research wing, following the corridor to the central laboratory where she knew Venrix would be waiting. The Quelnari researcher was exactly where she expected, surrounded by holographic displays showing data on human resurrection. He turned as Amy entered, his large black eyes widening slightly in what might have been surprise. Venrix spoke in his own language, but Amy understood every word now. He was asking how she had gotten past security, expressing scientific curiosity about whether her resurrection had granted her new abilities. Amy responded in perfect Quelnari, telling him that yes, every death made her more capable, more knowledgeable, more dangerous. She had died 7 times now since her first resurrection, and each death had taught her something new. The researcher seemed excited by this confirmation, already thinking about how to incorporate this information into his research. He told Amy that she must understand the importance of what he was doing, that human resurrection was the most significant biological phenomenon discovered in thousands of years. He insisted that the temporary suffering of a few hundred humans was worth the knowledge that could benefit the entire galaxy. Amy moved closer, her movement smooth and predatory in a way that made Venrix step back instinctively. She told him that she understood his perspective, that she knew he genuinely believed he was doing important work. But she also told him that his perspective was wrong, that no amount of knowledge justified torturing innocent people. She had been tortured to death by the Vexenari, and she knew exactly what he had done to those colonists. The physical pain was terrible, but the psychological damage was worse. Those children would never feel truly safe again. Venrix protested that the subjects came back to life, that no permanent physical harm was done. Amy's response was quiet but carried absolute certainty. She told him that death left scars that could not be seen on medical scanners, that resurrection did not erase trauma. She had come back from death, but she was not the same person she had been before. None of the resurrected humans were. They had all lost something essential, some connection to normal human experience that could never be recovered. She told Venrix that she was taking all of his research data, every file, every recording, every piece of evidence documenting what he had done to those humans. She was going to broadcast it across the galaxy so that every species would know what the Quelnari had done. His reputation would be destroyed. His standing in the scientific community would be gone. Let it serve as a lesson to any other species that considered humans as test subjects. Venrix tried to stop her, calling for security and attempting to lock down the laboratory systems. But Amy simply placed her hand on the nearest control panel, and the entire system responded to her touch. She downloaded the research data in seconds, copying it to a device she carried. Then she walked out of the laboratory, leaving Venrix shouting behind her about the importance of scientific freedom. Amy returned to the holding area where Kyle and Lisa had freed most of the colonists. The humans were gathering in small groups, parents holding children, friends supporting each other. Among them were the 7 who had died and returned during the experiments. Amy could identify them immediately by the way they moved, the calmness in their eyes that showed they were no longer afraid. They looked at her with recognition and understanding, knowing that she had experienced what they had experienced. Kyle had managed to get the containment systems fully shut down, and Lisa was doing triage on the colonists who needed immediate medical attention. Admiral Patterson's voice came through Amy's communication device asking for a status update. Amy reported that they had secured the colonists and were ready for evacuation. Patterson confirmed that shuttles were on their way to dock with the station. The evacuation took 2 hours, with Earth military shuttles ferrying the colonists from the research station to the waiting fleet. The Quelnari did not interfere, apparently recognizing that any attempt to stop the rescue would result in more casualties on their side. Venrix made one final plea to Amy as she was leaving, begging her not to release the research data, but she ignored him and boarded the last shuttle with Kyle and Lisa. Back aboard the Washington's Shield, Admiral Patterson debated whether to destroy the research station. Amy advised against it, arguing that allowing the Quelnari to face judgment from the galactic community would serve humanity better than simple destruction. Patterson agreed and ordered the fleet to return to Earth with the rescued colonists. True to her word, Amy broadcast the Quelnari research data across every available communication channel. The recordings showed human children being tortured, their screams echoing through sterile laboratories while Quelnari scientists took notes. The images showed the moment of death, then the resurrection 37 minutes later, then more experiments on the traumatized and confused humans. The galaxy watched in horror as the supposedly peaceful and enlightened Quelnari were revealed to be no better than the Vexnari in their willingness to cause suffering. The AO response was immediate and overwhelming. Species that had viewed humans as primitive or weak were forced to confront the reality of what human resurrection meant. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session and placed the Quelnari under strict sanctions, stripping them of their research privileges and restricting their access to other species. Thagibimbasu